What is going on, Raiders? Soda Dragon here. Welcome and hope you guys are doing well. So guys, today I'm going to show you a brutal Hydra team that is completely full auto and that works on any rotation. And the cool thing is we're not using any OP champions, for example, like Duchess and Krisk, and we're not using any enemy max HP champions either. So no Royal Guards, no Acrisias, no Husks, and we're not using any HP explosion champions, for example, like Ninja or Sissia. We're not using any of those types of champions. So guys, I'm going to show you the team and then I'm going to explain my general strategy for dealing with the Hydra. Now this applies to every Hydra difficulty. So guys, check this out. 46 million damage on the brutal difficulty of the Hydra with this team. Now I know there are 4 legendaries on this team, but they were accessible legendaries, at least most of them. So Mother Sibeli and Bivo, they were fusions, and Nekmothar was a guaranteed champion. So you could have gone for him if you wanted to. Now Tyrant, you don't need him, okay? Tyrant works well, but all we're using him for is this AoE HP burn, so he is replaceable by any AoE HP burn champion. So as far as who to substitute in for these different champions, I think the best way to go is to explain to you my strategy for dealing with the Hydra, and that will explain to you why I picked these champions in the first place, and then you can figure out who you can substitute these champs with. Now guys, there are a lot of different strategies and ways to deal with the Hydra. I'm gonna give you mine right now, and I like mine because it's very auto-friendly, which is the main thing I'm looking for. And I don't think it requires as many high-level champions as the other comps do. That being said, a lot of different strategies work for the Hydra. So it's not like this is the one and only one that works, of course. So there's a ton of different strategies that different people are using. So take advantage of those different strategies, because another strategy might work better on your account, whereas this one may not work as well because you just don't have the right champs to make this particular strategy work, and vice versa. So keep that in mind. All right guys, so let's start off on the very bottom foundation level. What is the first thing that I'm looking for in a comp for the Hydra? Now this includes all difficulties. It doesn't matter what difficulty we're looking at, it doesn't matter what rotation we're looking at. What are the first things I'm looking for in a team? And the first things, the very first things I'm looking for is AoE decrease speed and AoE increase speed. That is number one. Now some of you guys might be wondering at this point, well, why do you focus on those buffs and debuffs? That's increased speed and decreased speed. Because they don't counter any specific heads mechanics. So why focus on them as the very first thing you're looking for in a Hydra team, like I said? Well, it's because though they don't counter any specific heads mechanics, they counter the Hydra's mechanics really of swallowing. That's the main thing we're going for here. When your champions are swallowed, no matter what the rotation, you have a limited amount of time to get them out. And that time decreases the longer the fight goes on. So what do we need to counter that? That is that swallowing and regurgitating mechanic. We need increased speed and decreased speed. We need to lengthen the amount of time we have to get our swallow champions out. So obviously some champions have AoE decreased speed and other champions have AoE increased speed, but some champions have both, and those champions are so valuable, especially if you have increased turn meter as well. That's why Nekmothar here is huge. He is my foundation. Now what would be a good substitute for him? Any other champion that has AoE decreased speed and AoE increased speed, and hopefully increased turn meter. That's not a make it or break it, but increased turn meter is nice. Once again, we're lengthening the amount of time we have to free our swallow champions. Now guys, of course, if you don't have an all-in-one champion, that is a champion that can do AoE decreased speed and AoE increased speed, then it's fine to split up those tasks. Maybe, for example, one champion can go AoE decreased speed like Taniks, and another champion can go AoE increased speed like Apothecary. So it's fine if your champions don't have really all the roles. But if you happen to have certain champions that can fill multiple roles, of course that's better for you. So secondly, after we have our increased speed and decreased speed, what else are we looking for? Well, we're looking for ways to free our champions, because just because we're increasing the length of time we have to free our champions doesn't mean increased speed or decreased speed frees our champions. What do we need to do? We need to do damage to the Hydra heads to free our champions. So what is the simplest way we can free our champions? Do we need enemy max HP? No. Do we need exploding HP burns? No. Exploding poisons? No. All I'm looking for are two things: AoE HP burn and War Master or Giant Slayer on all of the champions. Those are it. That is literally all you need to free your champions. And look, we're talking about brutal here. That's it. You don't need enemy max HP champions. You don't need a Acrisia. You don't need any of that. You don't need exploding HP burns. Okay? AoE HP burn, no explosions, plus everyone on the team having War Master or Giant Slayer. That is our strategy for freeing our swallowed champions. Now, as far as War Master freeing your champs, here's the thing. The more A1 AoE champs you have on your team, the more auto-friendly it's gonna be. The less you have, the less auto-friendly it's gonna be. So you see here, I have 2 A1 AoE champions with War Master. Well, everyone has War Master, Giant Slayer, that's it, okay? But I have 2 of them in particular that have the AoE A1. So the more you have, the better. So guys, check it out. Who's the main damage dealer here? We only have one, and that's Tyrant because of its AoE HP burn. That's it. Everybody else is doing their job, so to speak. They're contributing with those War Master or Giant Slayer procs. That is it. You don't need 2 damage dealers. You don't need 3 damage dealers. You do need your team to contribute, but only as far as War Master and Giant Slayer. And most of these champs are not built for damage. Most of them are not. Some are, which we'll talk about, but most of them are not. So really, it's those War Master, Giant Slayer procs going fast enough because of the decreased speed and increased speed and that AoE HP burn ticking off that is going to free your champions. That is our main strategy. So guys, next let's talk about a general healing strategy. Now, of course, healing could just mean healers. For example, Bivolt here is a really good healer, but our general healing strategy for everybody is either War Master or Giant Slayer and the Life Drinker Mastery. Everybody gets that. All right, we're gonna need that source of healing from everybody because a lot of damage is being done, and unless you have a ton of healers on your team, you need people to self-heal, so to speak. So everybody on the team is going to have War Master or Giant Slayer, not only for their damage, but because of how well it works with the Life Drinker Mastery. So that's really important for keeping your team alive, for survivability, that ability to self-heal, once again, through Life Drinker and either War Master or Giant Slayer. So everybody on the team gets that combo. All right, guys, now that we have our main strategy down, let's talk about how we deal with the specific Hydra heads. Now, with regard to all the Hydra heads, there is pretty much one Hydra head I am mainly concerned with, over and above all the other Hydra heads, bar none, and that is the head of Decay. That cleansing head, the head of Decay, is the #1 head I want to control. That is it. Everyone else is a distant second. So that's part of my strategy. I'm not looking at every head kind of like equally. No, no, no. I want to lock down the most troublesome head. I want to control the most troublesome head. And who is that? That is that cleansing head, the head of Decay, and that head that also puts up that shield. Now guys, even though the head of Decay is our #1 focus, we need to build a team that can deal with all the heads. So that's a big part of my strategy too. I don't want a team that only deals with like one rotation, and if a certain head pops up, oh, well, we're gonna restart. No, 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 that's not how I do it. Okay, how I do it is that your team should be able to address every single head that pops up. Every single one. So it doesn't matter what rotation it is, your team should be able to address that. And so that's kind of like how I do things. Now for you, you may have limited resources and it may be hard for you to build a team that can address every single head. But as far as endgame, that's definitely what I try to do. So even though once again, the head of Decay is by far the first priority and the #1 priority that we focus on, the team as a whole is built to deal with every single head. So whoever rotates in, it doesn't matter, the team can deal with it. Now for those of you new to Hydra, here's the thing. It's not like the old clan boss, the Demon Lord. There is always RNG involved. There is always the potential of a bad run. That's just the way it is. Now we want to minimize it as much as possible, but there is always that possibility. So once again, it's not like the Demon Lord where you just, click your key and you kind of know how much damage you're gonna do. You know you're gonna get the top chest. It's pretty much done and sealed. Once you click that key, it's not like that. Hydra's not like that. There's always the possibility of a bad run. Now we try to minimize that, but there's always RNG involved. So it's the same thing with this team. This team has a very good win rate, but this is the Hydra we're talking about. There's no such thing as a 100% win rate against the Hydra. All right, guys, so back to the head of Decay. So I mentioned he's our #1 priority. So how do we control that head of Decay? How do we stop him from cleansing? How do we stop him from putting up that shield? Well, we provoke him. So this is a question for you guys. Guess how many champs on this team are devoted to controlling the head of Decay? If you said 1, you're wrong. If you said 2, you're wrong. If you said 3, you're wrong. If you said 4, yeah, finally, you are right. Because of how important the head of Decay is to control, not only do we have one dedicated provoke champion in Bivolt here, but we have 3 other champions in provoke sets. That is how important I consider the head of Decay is to control. Now, is it overkill? I don't think so. I don't think so, because Bivolt here, he doesn't have a 100% chance 2 landed provoke on his A1. Now, he does land it on his A2, but that has a cooldown associated with it. So we need something in between. Even with the decreased speed and increased speed, we need something in between, especially if we're going full auto. So that's why these other champions, especially our AoE champions here, we have Mother Sibylle, Inquisitor Shamail, and Nekmothar, all in provoke sets. Just in case that head pops up some other time, we need to lock it down. Now, can you get away with less champions in provoke sets than the 3 that I have? Yeah, you can, but I think the run is going to be less consistent. Now, if you're doing a manual run, that's completely different, okay? But if you want to full auto, then yeah, the more provoke sets you have, the better. Now, there's 1 dedicated provoke champ and 3 champs in provoke sets completely lock down the Head of Decay. No, it does not. Maybe 4 champs and provoke sets would be better. It does not completely lock down that Head of Decay, but it does most of the time. It does to an amount where I'm satisfied. So that's the thing. I mean, how much you're going to be satisfied with. Once again, you can run, Bivald by himself or anybody else, any other provoke champ, but the chance of it failing, that is the Head of Decay not being provoked and cleansing right before, that poison cloud, or putting up his little egg shield on the Hydra head that has swallowed champion, the chance of those things happening and just completely destroying your run are much, much higher. So once again, the Head of Decay is my #1 concern. And yeah, 4 of my champs are dedicated really to dealing with him. And that amount, yes, that's comfortable for me. Now the question is, can you use War Chief? He has a 3-turn provoke and a book 2-turn cooldown. Ridiculous. He can completely lock down the Head of Decay by himself, right? We don't need multiple champions and provoke sets when you have War Chief, right? Can you use him? The answer is yes, you can, but firstly, he can weak hit, so just be aware of that. And secondly, if the Head of Decay is not there, what is War Chief bringing to the table? Yeah, you might say, well, I mean, just in case, have him on the team. True, but I like to use champions that kind of bring something to the table no matter what heads are in rotation. Now, you might say, well, what does Bivald bring? Isn't he just a provoker? No, he's not. He's actually a really good healer. Plus, he puts up shields. So he's doing actually a lot for your team in addition to provoking. So that's my thing. Even if the Head of Decay is not there, let's say we burst it and whatever, some other head comes in, Head of Decay is nowhere to be found, Bivald is still doing a ton of the team. He's still doing damage, and he is still healing the team and keeping them alive through his shield. So everyone here contributes, I think, in more than one way. So multifaceted is what I'm looking for as far as the champions in the team. Now guys, next let's talk about how to deal with the individual heads. Now, there's a lot of different ways to deal with the heads, but I'm just going to go through the most common ones. So we're going to start with the Head of Mischief. How do we deal with the Head of Mischief stealing our buffs and then spreading our buffs among the Hydra heads? Well, the first way is going to be with resistance. Now, you can look at it as either team-wide resistance, that's going to be #1, so build everyone with enough resistance to resist that Head of Mischief stealing your buffs. Or the second way is with a Mischief tank. You can have one champion slower than the rest of the team, preferably a self buffer, but if not, that's okay. In a blood shield accessory, something like that, that is going to be the tank against the Head of Mischief. He's going to draw the Head of Mischief's attacks by being slower than the rest, by self buffing, etc., by having a blood shield accessory, so that he has more buffs than everyone else on your team. So Mischief is going to constantly target him, and then that one champion is going to have high resist instead of the rest of your team having high resist. So those are the first 2 ways, and the third way is going to be with block buffs. So with the Head of Mischief, if you put block buffs on him, he will take your buffs with his A1, but he won't assume the buffs. The buffs won't go on him, so to speak. So he'll be like a buff remover, but he won't take on those buffs that he stole from you. So you turn him to a buff remover or a buff stripper instead of a buff stealer if you have block buffs on him. So really, those are the 3 most common ways to deal with him. Less common ways are going to be things like decreased accuracy, debuff, things like that. But those are probably going to be the 3 most common ways to deal with the Head of Mischief. So the main way on our team that we're going to deal with the Head of Mischief is with Inquisitor Shamail. He is built as a Mischief tank. He has high resist, plus he also is slower than everyone else, so buffs fall off him slower. That is, they expire slower. And he has a blood shield accessory on him. Now here's the thing. Bivald puts a strengthen on himself and nobody else, so sometimes he is going to be the Mischief target as well. So knowing that, here's the thing, both of those champs are built with pretty high resistance. Now, In general, we're going to talk about how much resistance you need for the whole team. But as far as the particular mischief targets right now that we're talking about, it's going to be mainly Inquisitor Shamail, but sometimes Bivald here gets targeted. So we're going to have to build him as a mischief tank as well. So we have 2 mischief tanks on this team. Now my resist on my Inquisitor and Bivald, they're not high enough to resist the head of mischief like all the time. They probably make pretty poor mischief tanks, just to be honest with you, because it's really hard to build all those stats in your different champions. That being said, the backup is that block buffs debuff. That's the backup, just in case something sneaks through, just in case the head of mischief happens to steal buffs off our mischief tanks or happens to target somebody else for some reason. We do have that block buffs up most of the time. So that is going to be our backup against the head of mischief. Next up, guys, is going to be the head of wrath. So what are the most common ways to deal with him? Well, first it's going to be block buffs, in particular to stop him from buffing himself with that increased attack buff, but he buffs himself with other buffs as well. But that's one we want to stop in particular. But another thing is to remove buffs. So just in case he gets that increased attack buff up or that block debuffs up, we can remove it. Those are removable buffs. Most of his buffs are removable. So definitely we try to do that when we can. And lastly, we need decreased attack, just to make him a little bit weaker, to make him hit less hard. So those are the 3 main ways that you deal with the head of wrath. So on our team, Ugo here and Nekmo are helping us deal with that head of wrath. How? With the block buffs from Ugo. She has AoE block buffs, really important. In particular with this particular head, we don't want that increased attack up. As much as we can, it's not perfect. Ugo cannot keep up that block buffs with 100% uptime, but as close as we can get to it, she's gonna do it. Okay, she has 2-turn block buffs on a booked 3-turn cooldown. Plus we have Nekmothar with his A1 decreased attack. So most of the time he's gonna be keeping up that decreased attack against the head of wrath, and that block buffs is going to prevent the head from buffing with that increased attack buff. Next up, guys, the head of torment, that blue head that puts up all those fears. So what are the most common ways to deal with the head of torment? Well, firstly, you can cleanse off those fears. Another thing you can do is bring in perfect veil so you can attack that head and not be feared. But one last thing is going to be Shamail. Shamail in particular counters that particular head. He will remove all fears from all your allies pretty much all the time. So our main strategy for dealing with that head of torment is going to be Shamail here. Now some of you guys might be saying, well, didn't you say you want champs to be like multifaceted and bring multiple things to the table? What is Shamail bringing here except being a counter to the head of torment? Well, he's bringing a lot of things. Firstly, he's in a provoke set, so he's actually a provoker, a backup provoker to the head of Decay. And he's also a mischief tank like I talked about. So he's slower than the rest of the team. He has a blood shield accessory, has high resist, so he's going to be drawing the fire of that head of mischief a lot. So he's bringing multiple things to the table in addition to really being one of the best counters to the head of torment. Next up, guys, is the poison head, the head of blight. How do we deal with him? Well, firstly, with regard to the poison cloud that he puts up over all the other Hydra heads that makes you weak hit. How we deal with that is preemptive HP burn AoE or preemptive block buffs AoE. That's really what we want. Those are the most common ways to do it. Now, you can use champs that can place HP burns and they won't be stopped by the poison cloud. So, for example, somebody like Mordecai or Tumacia, they can do it. But most AoE HP burn champs, most HP burn champs in general, cannot place their HP burns through that poison cloud. So we need to preempt it. So here you see we're using Time for AoE HP burns. He cannot do it through the poison cloud, so we're going to need him to place it before that poison cloud goes up. And as a backup, we have Ugo here for the block buffs to stop that poison cloud just straight up in its tracks. Now, how do we deal with the poisons that the head of blight throws out against our team? Well, that is with team-wide resist. Now, you don't need like perfect resist numbers. You just need to watch your team and see how many poisons your different team members are accruing. And if it's too much, if they end up dying, then yeah, up their resistance. But if they end up taking a few poisons here and there, but it's really no big deal, they're pretty tanky, they last, then you're good to go. So when I say team-wide resist, I'm not talking about like everyone has to be the same as your mischief tank, not that high, but you're gonna need some resist. Because if you have like no or low resist on your champs, all those poisons from the head of blight, it is just gonna kill your team. Now, can you cleanse them? Yes, you can. That is a good option if you happen to have a cleanser, right? In this team, we don't have a cleanser. So really for this type of team, the option is going to be to resist most of those poisons. So lastly, guys, talk about the Head of Suffering, that tanky head. So how do we deal with him? Well, with the ally protection and that reflect damage, we're going to deal with that with block buffs. Now, you can strip it, and technically we have buff stripper here in Inquisitor Shamail, but he's just not built that way. His A1 can remove buffs, that is, decrease the duration of the buffs, which is pretty much remove them, but he's not built that way. So pretty much we don't have a buff remover or buff stripper on this team. But we're going to use block buffs through Ugo to hopefully block that reflect damage. Now, reflect damage on this type of team isn't that big a deal, even with the War Master procs, Giant Slayer procs. Now, we don't want it, but it's not as big a deal as it would be if we're using enemy max HP champs. If that reflect damage is up and you go with that, enemy max HP skill, your guy's probably going to die. I mean, it's just too much reflected damage. This team, it's not too bad, but still, we do want to prevent it most of the time. So as far as that weekend, how do we deal with that? With team-wide resist. Once again, we really don't want that buff up a lot. So definitely check your team, see how often they're getting that weaken on them. Hopefully they're resisting it at least most of the time, and just see how your team is doing. If your team occasionally, different members get that weaken, but they seem to be okay, they're pretty tanky, then it's no big deal. But if certain members of your team are pretty frail, you probably want to up the resistance, because a frail champion having weaken on them and then getting hit by something like the Head of Wrath is just too much. So once again, it's kind of like on a case by case basis. See which one of your champions are dying earliest and why, and kind of try to address it. So guys, in summary, let's look at the top 4 things we're looking for in any Hydra team. And this is going to be kind of summing up all the things that we talked about. So number 1 is going to be AoE increase speed and decrease speed. Best if you can get it in one champion. If you cannot, that's fine. Split it up in 2 champions. But we're going to need that to deal with the swallowing mechanic, which is present, in any rotation. All right, that's one of the main ways the Hydra functions, and that's how we deal with that. Number 2 is going to be through provoking the Head of Decay. So we're going to need provoke. Number 2 is provoke. Now, I like a dedicated provoker and backup provokers in provoke sets, but it's up to you. But number 2 is going to be that provoke debuff, debuffing that Head of Decay. Number 3 is going to be a way to deal with the Head of Torment. So either that's going to be through cleansers, like general cleansers like Tuhana Rock, Doom Priest, or it's going to be with a very specific fear cleanser like Shamail. So it's up to you guys. Both work really well, but we're going to need to deal with that Head of Torment and those fears. So we're going to need to cleanse them off somehow. And number 4 is going to be with block buffs. Now, block buffs really counters 4 of the 6 heads, and we talked about it, right? It counters so many of the different heads. Now, not perfectly, but still really well. Really well. So that's going to be our 4th most important thing that we need from our team. We need someone to bring in those AoE block buffs. And as far as how we free our Swallow champions, we're only doing it through 2 ways: AoE, HP burn, and War Master or Giant Slayer procs. That is it. So guys, this is a completely full auto team, though we're going to use targeted auto, which we'll talk about in a second. But really, if you want the most efficient runs, it's going to be through manualing. So there's just no way around it. You will always do better damage, last longer, be more efficient through manualing. Though, as far as like quality of life, time efficiency, you're going off and doing something else, yes, the full auto is the best way to go. So as far as who to target, if the Head of Decay is present, you always target it. It is always your number 1 priority with that targeted auto. So you're always clicking on the Head of Decay to make sure that that is the target. Now, if the Head of Decay is not present, then you can go ahead and you don't have to have any specific target. You can choose basically who you want, or nobody, that's fine. Once again, if the Head of Decay is not present. If the Head of Decay is present, it is always your number 1 target, and you will always click on it. Now, the next question is, what do you do about swallow champions? Well, rule 1 still applies. Let's say the Head of Wrath swallows your champion, but the Head of Decay is present. What do you do with the targeted auto? Well, you target the Head of Decay. That's rule number 1, and you still do it. If the Head of Decay is present, you never stop targeting it, at least on auto. Now, if you want to stop the auto and do manual, that's fine as well. That's probably way more efficient. But as far as a full auto run, the Head of Decay always takes precedent over everything else, even a swallow champion by another head. So once again, if the Head of Wrath swallows your champ and the Head of Decay is still there, you still target that Head of Decay and hope that HP burn ticks and those War Master procs are enough to free your champions, and most of the time they are. Now, if the Head of Decay is not present and a Hydra head swallowed champion, feel free to target them with that targeted auto. But if the head of Decay is there, then rule number 1 applies, and you always target the head no matter who else swallows your champions. Alright guys, on to the team setup. So for Nekbothar here, I turn on speed weirding as a first priority. For Ugo here, I leave everything as default. For Tyrant here, I turn on his AoE HP burn as the first priority. For Bivolt here, I just start with his A1, but this isn't really required. For Inquisitor, I start with his A1 too, once again, not required. For Mother Sibeli here, I like to turn off Uncanny Transfer, though it's a great skill on manual. That's the thing, if you manual this, it's an awesome skill, but on full auto, it's not really that great, and I actually wanted to use her A1 more to land those decreased speeds as a backup, and also to provoke. So that's the thing, she's a backup provoker in that provoke set. So I go ahead and turn off Uncanny Transfer, though once again, for manual, it is a great skill. All right, guys, on to everyone's gear stats and mastery, starting with Nekmothar here. So what do I have him in? I have him in a provoke set and an immortal set. On to his total stats. So I have his HP at 58,000. I have his attack at 2,100. I have his defense at 3,000. I have his speed 249, crit rate 60%, crit damage 84%, resist 366, and accuracy 303. So what stats are important? Well, firstly, the HP and defense for the tankiness. For all of your champs, you're gonna need a lot of HP and defense. The attack isn't too relevant because we're doing damage based off War Master procs primarily. Speed, probably don't want him too much slower than this. Faster is fine. Crit damage, crit rates, not too important. Resist, we're really looking at 395 plus as a general resistance for the brutal difficulty. So you see, I have it close here. Not quite. I do end up getting provoked sometimes, some poisons, but I do end up resisting a lot of debuffs. So once again, we're looking at 395 plus resistance for brutal difficulty, just for general resistance, for resisting the general debuffs, not the Head of Mischief. Now, as far as the accuracy, we're looking at 235 plus, so I have a healthy amount at 303. Onto his masteries. So as I mentioned before, everybody on the team is either going to get War Master here or Giant Slayer. So we're doing damage based off enemy max HP, a lot of damage, and they're going to combo that with Life Drinker. Everybody on the team is going to have this combo. Life Drinker plus either War Master or Giant Slayer. Everybody, because they need to self-heal. There's a lot of damage being done, and a lot of times the healers can't do enough by themselves. Now, in addition to that, we also have some turn meter boosting masteries. I like, for example, Rapid Response here, and I also like Arcane Celerity. Now, as far as increasing the duration of debuffs, we have Master Hexer here, which is really important for him. Next up, guys, is going to be Bivald. So how have I geared him? I have him in 2 perception sets and a divine crit rate set. Onto his total stats. So I have his HP at 76,000. I have the attack at 1,700. I have the defense at 2,800. Speed 217. Crit rate 103%. Crit damage 228%. Resist 361 and accuracy 254. So what stats are important? Well, firstly, the HP and the defense, in particular the HP, because it not only keeps him tanky, but his damage is based on HP. Attack is not relevant. Speed, you don't want him too slow. Definitely over 200, as fast as you can make him, because he's going to be the primary provoker. Crit rate and crit damage, I do have him built to do damage, so that's up to you guys, but I feel like he does best when he's doing damage, because a lot of his healing is based off damage. Now his resist here, 361, once again, we're looking at 395 plus. Close. He resists most debuffs, but not all of them. And accuracy, 254. Once again, we're looking at over 235, so we're good on the accuracy. Onto his masteries. So down the offense tree here, I do have War Master, so we're getting bonus damage based off enemy max HP, and once again, we have the Life Drinker in conjunction with that. Now, down the support tree, I do have Lasting Gifts here for extending his shields, the duration that is. And I do have Master Hexer here for extending his debuffs. Now, it won't extend the provoke, but it will extend his leech, his AoE leech, which is really important for keeping the team alive. And this will extend that from 2 to potentially 3 turns. Next up, guys, is going to be Tyrant Ixlamore. So how have I geared him? I have him in 3 perception sets. Onto his total stats. So I have his HP at 61,000. I have the attack at 1,700, defense 3,800, speed 224, crit rate 30%, crit damage 121%, resist 412, and accuracy 311. So what stats are important? Well, the HP and the defense for the tankiness. Attack is not relevant on this champion. Speed 224, make him as fast as possible. Now, with Tyrant, you do have 100% uptime on the HP burn if he is fully booked, so it's not like he's making up in a gap for that HP burn like a lot of champions are when they have 2-turn HP burns on 3-turn cooldowns. So he doesn't have as much a requirement for speed as some of those other champions, but still trying to make him fairly fast. So crit damage not relevant. Resistance, we're looking at over 395, so we have 412 here. We're good with that. And accuracy, we're way overboard. We're looking at over 235 plus. We have 311 here. Onto his masteries. So down the offense tree here, I do have War Master, so we're getting bonus damage based off enemy max HP. Once again, we're doing that with Life Drinker to get that healing. And this is really important for him too, Solidarity. Now, this is important if you're using an AoE HP burn champ that does have some sort of buff, because when you buff your fellow champions, you're giving them more resist as well. So this is really good for this particular champion. And we have a few of the counterattack masteries here as well. Next up, guys, is going to be Mother Sibeli. So how have I geared her? I have her in a provoke set and a perception set. Onto her total stats. So I have her HP at 61,000. I have the attack at 2,200. I have the defense at 3,100. Speed 250. Crit rate 63%, crit damage 99%, resist 410, and accuracy 222. So what stats are important? Well, firstly, the HP and the defense for the tankiness. The attack is not important. Speed 250, don't make her too slow. We need her to use her A1 a lot, not only to put that decreased speed on the enemies as a backup to Necmo, but also to provoke with that set. We need her to use that A1 a lot. So crit rate, crit damage, not super important. Fit it in if you want to. Resist 410, so we're above that threshold for brutal. And for accuracy, we're almost there with 222 accuracy, but she lands her debuffs most of the time. Onto our masteries. So down the offense tree here, we do have War Master, so we're getting bonus damage based off enemy max HP. Now down the support tree, we do have lasting gifts here for her increased defense. We want to increase the duration of that. And here we do also have Master Hexer. This is for potentially extending her decreased speed on her A1. Next up, guys, is Ugo. So how do I get her? I have her in a relentless set and a speed set. Onto her total stats. So I have her HP at 47,000, I have the attack at 1600, defense 4200, speed 220, crit rate 20%, crit damage 96%, resist 335, and accuracy 233. So what stats are important? Well, firstly, the HP and defense for the tankiness. Attack is now relevant. Speed 220. Try to push it as high as you can to keep the uptime on that block buffs up. Now, crit rate, crit damage not needed. Resist, once again, we're looking at 395 plus. Ideally for brutal, 335. It's okay. Now, as far as accuracy, we're looking at over 235 for brutal, and we have 233 here, so we're pretty okay on the accuracy, though a little bit higher would be better. Onto our masteries. So down the offense tree here, we do a War Master, so we're getting bonus damage based off enemy max HP. Now, another thing we're getting is Master Hexer here in particular for extending the duration of that block buffs, which is like the main reason we're using her. So definitely want to get Master Hexer and extend that 2 duration block buffs to a 3 duration block buffs. Lastly, guys, is going to be our Mischief Tank Shamail. So how have I geared him? I have him in a Provoke set and an Immortal set. Now, guys, if you're using a Mischief Tank, whoever it is, make sure to put a Blood Shield accessory on them. What this ensures is that they have 1 more buff than everyone else on your team, at least most of the time. So this makes the Head of Mischief target them on purpose. So you're kind of leading the Head of Mischief to target Shamail, because Shamail is always going to have 1 more buff, or most of the time is going to have 1 more buff than the rest of the team. Onto his total stats. So I have his HP at 42,000, I have the attack at 3,300, I have the defense at 2,700, I have the speed 199, crit rate 38%, crit damage 163%, resist 342, and accuracy 160. So what stats are important? Well, firstly, the HP and defense for tankiness. As far as attack, if you want to do damage, then put up that attack number. If you don't care about that, then attack is not needed. Speed, make him slower than everybody else if you're using him as a Mischief Tank. Crit damage not needed unless you really want him to do damage. Resist, remember, we're looking at 395 plus for brutal, and 342 is not good enough, but we have block buffs as a backup against the Head of Mischief. That's why we want multiple avenues to deal with those different heads, and we do have that, even though he does resist sometimes with this amount of accuracy. So though, once again, we want it a lot higher. I mean, basically 400 plus. Now, as far as accuracy, we're not using him for his debuffing A1, so basically accuracy is not needed. Onto his masteries. So if your team isn't perfect in their resistance and they pick up debuffs here and there, then you're going to want Giant Slayer instead of War Master, because you're going to be counterattacking a lot to counter those debuffs. So yeah, it's up to you guys. If you have perfect resistance and you never pick up any debuffs, then of course, guys, go War Master. But my team doesn't have perfect resistance. So yes, Giant Slayer for me works a lot better. So either one that you get, make sure to once again get Light Drinker with it. Now, I went down the defense tree with him since I really don't need accuracy on him, and picked up here the counterattack masteries. So guys, as far as books, everyone needs to be booked. If you're talking about brutal and above, absolutely everyone needs to be booked. There's no way you're going to bring in a champion for brutal Hydra or Nightmare Hydra that's not fully booked. Now, hard, you may be able to get away with not everyone being fully booked. Maybe, maybe not. Normal, maybe. But hard, probably not. And brutal and above, no way. Now, guys, as far as other difficulties for normal and hard, of course, this team would be viable if it's viable for the brutal Hydra. So yes, anything easier than this, you can use this exact same team, and of course it should function even better. Now Nightmare, I think it should function exactly the same way, but you're just going to need more stats. So you need more resistance, you need more speed, you need more accuracy, things like that. But I think this team is completely viable for Nightmare, though I'm going to have to test it. I don't really have the gear yet. As far as the accuracy and resistance, it's really crazy how much you need. But as far as the champions itself and conceptually this team working, it should work exactly the same for Nightmare if if you have the right stats from the gear. So guys, that's gonna be it. Let me know what you think about this team in the comments and if you're gonna try it out. And if this video has been helpful to you, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It's free to you, it helps me out a ton. It ensures that you don't miss out on any of my new videos. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.